Okay, so welcome back to the show, Tony. And of course, a very happy and a very healthy new year to you. So let's just jump right into this. My question to you is, how much do you think that hashtag that was trending, Trump stinks, that was all over Twitter and Threads and all social media platforms, how much do you think that that bothers Donald? And how true do you think that the rumor is?
Well, first, I think it would bother him a lot, as I know you would think, because there is nothing he hates more than feeling diminished or humiliated. And that's a pretty low blow, a kind of attack that you haven't bathed. Do I believe Donald might not bathe or shower? You bet your life I do. I think I think he thinks he's immune to all of the world's influences. And so he could easily choose not to do that and assume that, like the emperor with no clothes, behind a screen, nobody would notice. So I don't know it to be true, but I certainly think it will irritate him.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it irritates him. In fact, when I was on my other podcast, which is called Political Beatdown, I just came up with the name Donald Von Schitzenpants, because that's really what they're referring to. Not that he doesn't shower or he doesn't use deodorant. That I'm certain, being the germaphobe that I know him to be, I know him to also be clean when it comes to that. His hands are always meticulous. There's never any dirt on his hands. Not that he's ever done any physical labor that there would be dirt on his hands, but his hands are always very, very clean. I think that what they're really referring to is that he has some issues that he's wearing Depend type diapers, for adults, and that, there are occasions where it looks like the same way a baby is defecating in their diapers, that he is doing the same thing. Hence, of course, the hashtag Trump stinks, or the Donald Von Schitzenpants.
Michael, you've taken me to a place I didn't intend to go. I know it can only go up from here.
I'm not so sure about that. It's been a long time since you've been on the show. We kind of delve into the dirty, but so I think I'm going to stay with you on the same answer. I don't know the rumor to be true. It certainly appears, at least from photos, that there is a very large puffy area from the belly button down that a lot of people have speculated are undergarments. Adult undergarments. So who knows?
There is nobody else running for president now or ever before about whom anyone would be inclined to have this conversation. It's only Donald Trump that would prompt this conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not really 100% sure I understand the reason why. I mean, there are so many other things that people could be talking about to disqualify him as the presidency. But I will ask you this, because in the same vein, how does it affect Donald when it comes out that he's been clearly inflating his wealth by a significant amount, or that he was buddies with Jeffrey Epstein, or worse, the allegations that he's a rapist? You think that matters to him, and you think that it matters to him now?
Well, let's call through this. So does it bother him to be associated with Jeffrey Epstein in his private moments? No. In fact, I think he probably thought Jeffrey Epstein was a pretty cool guy and introduced him to some pretty teenagers. No, he wouldn't mind being associated with Jeffrey Epstein personally. He might mind it for its public relations impact. Does he mind being accused of having inflated his net worth? Immensely. Why? Because Trump, in his heart of hearts, confuses material value with human value. He believes that if he has more and more money, he is more valuable. He is more respectable. If he has less, he's nobody. And so when he is accused of lying about it, which of course he does to an extreme degree, I knew that as far back as 1986, that he was massively inflating what he was worth, yeah, he feels incredibly diminished by it.
And what about the whole issue of being called a rapist? Now, what I'm referring to in this part of the question is obviously in the E. Jean Carroll case, it was determined the sexual assault. Some people, and I have not read the decision in a long time, I don't recall them using the term rapist. Certainly sexual assault took place. What about that? Do you think that bothers him? And especially when I say, does it bother him? Does it bother him now, as, being the front runner or the presumed nominee for the 2024 election for the Republican Party?
I don't think, again, in the privacy of his own house or office, that being called a rapist bothers him. Look, first of all, we know that the original person who called him a racist was his wife, Ivana, who said that after he got enraged about his hair transplant, he raped her. And then she later took that back, probably got paid a lot of extra money for doing so. But there is no question how many women have accused him of sexual assault, including, of course, the full group who we learned about in the 2016 campaign. So yes, I think his attitude toward aggression, anger, violence is to be attracted to it, not to be repelled by it. Again, he's running for president. Of course, he doesn't want people to call him a rapist. But, when I wrote about him in 1986, before I got involved with his book, and I wrote a cover story for New York Magazine about his trying to harass tenants out of his building on 100 Central Park South, the cover picture was Trump as a thug, as a menace, as a criminal. That's how he looked. He liked it so much that he put it in the most prominent place, framed it and put it in the most prominent place in his office. Why? Because he loves to be seen as a tough guy, as weak bullies do.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to argue with you on that one. I used to have conversations, with him. And so interestingly enough, and he acknowledged he's actually never been in a physical altercation in his entire life, not even when he was young. Now, he did get slapped around. I know his older brother used to slap him around. He had a couple of scenarios at schools, like at the New York Military Academy, where, he was picked on and bullied by, other kids, which is truly hard to believe because he's always been tall, right? I mean, like the way Barron is very tall and the way Eric was very tall. He was very tall, but he was one of these tall kids that just shied away from aggression. And if somebody was picking on him, he just basically ran away. I mean, that's the stories that I had heard, not just even from himself, but from his sister, Judge Barry, who used to say all the time, that she could kick his ass if she really wanted to, because he was just petrified of any altercation, which makes perfect sense why in these NFTs or in these projections, like what you were referring to on the cover of the magazine, where he is portrayed as a real tough guy, as a bodybuilder, as a marshal, as a boxer, as an astronaut. I mean, anything that promotes this sense of strength and power, that's what he goes for. Because, again, it's the exact opposite.
Exactly. I think he's got a deep sense. You and I have talked about this, and both of us have talked about it individually, but he has a deep sense of inadequacy, of weakness, that he doesn't matter, that he's not okay. Certainly not remotely believes that he is the person he claims to be. So, of course, he's in terror because he feels like such a phony. He he recognizes now. The word recognition is tough there. How conscious is he of these feelings? Maybe at this point, he's so defended that he doesn't actively feel that sense of inadequacy. And instead, he acts out and gets angry at other people and tries to demonstrate his power and all those things. But I have zero doubt that this man fundamentally feels like he is a worthless human being.
Okay. So this it's really interesting way to describe it, because the way that he projects himself is clearly the exact opposite. You would think that somebody who has the extensive inadequacies or the feelings of inadequacies would not be seeking an office like the presidency of the United States of America, where you are constantly on, you have to be on your game 24/7, and every single aspect of your life is being detailed by a journalist who has all day, all night, all week, all month to get to the bottom of the story, especially if it's one that, does not project the strength that he wants you to believe. Why run then for the office?
Precisely for that reason, is to try to demonstrate by being elected president and by being able to exercise the powers of the presidency that he is not, in fact, what he believes himself to be. He's looking for external markers to prove that what he feels is true is not true. Now, I think to run for president when you are as limited a human being as Trump is, when it's not just that your intellect is very, very limited, it's also that emotionally you're cut off, that spiritually you're empty. The only reason that a person like him has the audacity to run for president is, I think, a function of his sociopathy. Trump, I feel, and I've written about this, I've written about I wrote a piece called The Psychopath in Chief that is easily gotten on by Googling it, in which my contention, having done a great deal of research about it, is that Trump is not simply a narcissist, doesn't simply have narcissistic personality disorder. He specifically has psychopathy. And that's characterized first and foremost by the absence of conscience. He does not feel the same things that other people feel. You and I have spoken about this recently, that Trump is someone who would walk onto the field in a football game as a coach and gather his players together before the game, and he would say without an ounce of guilt, look, we don't play by the rules here. Run outside the lines, sucker punch the players, go after the refs, lie about the score, and it would not for one moment bother him. And the story he'd be able to tell himself is, that never happened. We won. Just like he said about the election. There is incontrovertible evidence that he lost that election by a great deal. He believes, or at least he is he's not bothered by the notion that he's lying, that he actually won. He's perfectly willing to say that, because to say anything else is to feel so small that it's unbearable.
Right. Except, how then do you explain the 70 million people? Let me not exaggerate on that number. Yes, 70 million people voted for him. However, not 70 million Americans believe in Trump's big lie. Let's even just say that it's half of that group. How do you convince 35 million Americans, 35 million, that the big lie is real? Simply because you believe this bullshit? How do you confuse them to the extent that they believe whatever it is that you say.
It's a statement about the way people feel. It says more about Americans, to be quite honest, or those Americans, than it does about Trump. And I think it's a function of the fact that people feel so overwhelmed, so impotent, so unable to create the lives that they would like to have, or in some cases, many cases, feel entitled to have, that along comes some guy who blusters and lies and seems to get away with anything and claim whatever he wants. And I think millions of people latch onto that, as they have other autocrats through history, to get some of what they think he has, some of the power that they assume he's able to summon and to affect his fate. And so I think it's completely inexplicable on rational terms. If you think about this logically, it doesn't work at all. But those 35 million people are almost completely being guided by their emotions about this, not by their brains or their logic.
But Tony, we've never had that in America. Yes, I acknowledge what you're saying, that in worldview, there have been many, many millions of people that have latched on to, autocratic leaders, to supreme leaders, to monarchs, to the Fuhrer. We've never had that in America. We're different. Democracy, which is a test, it is not a constitutional right. It is an experiment. We've never wanted, we fought for our democracy. We fought for the Constitution. And yet, he's still stepping up now and bamboozling these 35 plus million people to believe whatever he said. And even when Donald turned around and said, and he wasn't joking, something that you know well, Donald doesn't have a sense of humor, and he doesn't joke, that if he wanted to shoot and kill someone on Fifth Avenue, that he could do it and get away with it. He wasn't bullshitting. He really, truly believes that as well.
Absolutely. So I think the question you're asking me is, how could this happen in America? It never happened before. We've had a 200 plus year democracy. And until Trump came along, nobody really thought it was a threat. But here's the truth. No democracy has ever lasted forever. And people are flawed, and people are, when they are overwhelmed, they react in ways that they think serve their survival. Now, it's the opposite. If we had the election today, I think it's quite plausible, not definite, but quite plausible Trump would win. And those people who voted for him would find out incredibly quickly, as people who lived in autocracies and do live in autocracies around the world, that they are not safe because they voted for Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. He hates weakness. He hates people who are not, quote, successful. And the very people who are, it's not only people who are economically disadvantaged or, who are for Trump and uneducated, but it's a lot of them. And they are the people he will protect the least, with the exception of people like you and me, who he will go after.
Right. But there's even more here, and that you just brought up. Donald doesn't care for the economically advantaged, the billionaire class. Now, he's done things that benefited them, but one thing that you know, and I know well, is the one thing that Donald cares the most about in life is money, is being recognized as incredibly rich. If Donald becomes president again in 2024, it's actually the economically advantaged that need to worry more than the economically disadvantaged, because he's already suckered them out of the few dollars that they can afford to give. He will go after the Bezoses of the world. He will go after the Elon Musks of the world, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Koch brothers, right? Or the Koch Foundation. He will go after all of them and do as a copycat exactly what Mohammed bin Salman did to his relatives. He will lock them up. Maybe it'll be at Mar-a-Lago in the ballroom, the way Mohammed bin Salman did at the Ritz, and he will have them sign over their wealth to him. And he will do it. And everybody says, stop it, that's bullshit, you can't do that, this is America. I try to remind these fucking morons that look at what happened to me. Lured down to 500 Pearl Street by two low-level nobodies. This guy Pakula and this woman Enid Phoebus, who now is retired living in Florida. They gave me a document that they prepared specifically for me that violated my First Amendment constitutional right. Myself and my buddy, he's a friend, lawyer, Jeffrey K. Levine, said, hey, this is really violative of the First Amendment. I can't speak to press. I can't put out my book. I can't I can't go on social media. I can't do X, Y, and Z. Is there a way we can tamp down the language? Oh, sure. Why don't you wait in the hallway for us? We'll see after we speak to our superiors what we can do. Instead, they had already had the remand documentation prepared, signed, needed to get it over to the marshals so that they could have the marshals come grab me from 500 Pearl Street, handcuff, shackle me, and return me to Otisville because I refused to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. So if anybody thinks that Donald, if he, like he said, rewrites the Constitution on day number 1, gets rid of the judiciary and the legislative branch, and confers all power to the executive branch, meaning himself, becoming king, Führer, monarch, supreme leader, whatever the hell you want to call him, that he won't be able to take their money, they're fucking wrong.
Well, I do believe that one of the most intriguing people relative to Trump, should he be reelected, is Elon Musk, because there's nobody who Donald would be more jealous of, with the possible exception of Putin, Kim Jong-un. In America, Elon Musk is the guy who has what he wants, which is to be the richest person in the country. So Elon Musk goes around now spouting Trumpisms, and if not supporting him outright, certainly being generally favorable to him. And he's going to discover, just like all the millions of people who are going to vote for him will discover, that you never get a good deal with Donald Trump. You give him your loyalty, he takes from you whatever he can. That's the equation. And it is remarkable, Michael, that as we were talking about earlier, that the powerful emotions that people feel around their own powerlessness have blinded them to a reality that's been repeated historically, both in Trump's life and in the lives of many other people who've tried to do or have successfully done what he's done in terms of moving toward a dictatorship. It's remarkable, but it is a real sign of the decline of the decency that turns out to be a thin layer at the top of people or around people that can be overwhelmed by their fears.
You see, one of the funny things is you take a look to see who Trump wants to side with, who he claims are his friends, right? The Mohammed bin Salmans, the Putins, the Kim Jong-uns, or the Viktor Orbans, right? But take out of that entire group of dictators, supreme leaders, monarchs, rulers, whatever you want to call them, take out of that group who are really the two with the significant amounts of money. And the answer is Putin, that some would claim is the richest man in the world, But then you also have Mohammed bin Salman because of obviously all of the oil. In fact, we know that what Mohammed bin Salman did on day number 1 when he became the crown prince is he rounded everybody up, and then he went and he bought in one day a $500 million home in France right next to the Louvre. He bought a $500 million painting, and he bought a $500 million yacht. In one day, the guy spent $1.5 billion on himself, and that was post taking the money from his family members or the royals there in Saudi Arabia. And if people say that, let's say that Vladimir Putin is worth $500 billion, Trump wants to be worth $1 trillion. Well, just by taking Elon Musk's money, you're just about a third of the way there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so now you take Zuckerberg's money, you take, Bezos's money, and you start putting them together. You've already exceeded the Putin number. He wants the whole world to know that he is the richest man in the world with $1 trillion. And here's the thing. If he becomes the king, which is what he wants, if he is able to confer power solely onto himself, now he also controls the military might of the United States, from nuclear to the freestanding army. Let me tell you something. It's really an unstoppable maniac.
Yeah. Well, I pray every day that does not turn out to be the case, because I do think he is capable of infinite harm. I mean, I remember saying to Jane Mayer of The New Yorker when she was writing a piece about my experience in 2016 that, when Trump had his finger on the nuclear button, we were deeply at risk, because if he feels offended enough or small enough, if he feels the hunger to assert his power and dominance, his impulsive, reactive capacity to blow up the world cannot be underestimated. He absolutely can do that. The only reason he wouldn't do it at this point, he didn't think he could get away with it in the past, I suspect, in his first administration. The only reason he wouldn't do it is because he doesn't want to die. But
as he gets closer in age to that moment in time, he doesn't care. If I have to go, you should all go too.
I don't think that's true, Michael. I think what happens to people who've lived very unsatisfying, deeply screwed up lives, who were wounded early and never recovered, is that the closer they get to death, the more terrified they are. Because the people who can make peace with the reality of death are the people who have had a good life and who can say, as I hope I'll be able to say, because I'm 72 years old, I know my life is not infinite, that I hope what I'll be able to say is, I got my shot. I had a good life. I made a difference. I contributed. I got satisfaction. I'm proud of my kids. He can't say any of that.
And that's why life to him doesn't mean, your life means nothing. My life means nothing. Correct. Everybody's life in the world means nothing. So if he needs to go out with a bang, he'll go out with a bang.
I agree with you right up until the bang. I don't think he wants to go out. I remember somebody I knew very, very well, a close friend of my family in his 90s, when he was dying, and I was there in his room, a number of days before he died. He was climbing the walls about his imminent death. And it was so obvious that the reason was because he'd had an unlived life. And he could not bear the thought that he was going and would never get that life. And I'll tell you, this whole discussion about 500 million here and the different billionaires, think about this, Michael, and you've had enough experience around these people to know a lot about this. You get past take your number, 100 million, 500 million, maybe even less. And you have now purchased all the things, or you have the ability to purchase all the things that people can buy. What is the meaning to a Musk or a Jeff Bezos of having a couple $100 billion? It has literally no impact on their everyday experience.
It will when Donald comes and takes it all.
Yeah, they'll feel bad about it because they live, by the way, all those people who have devoted their lives to having hundreds of millions or hundreds of billions of dollars have been following an illusion. It's just another addiction. Mm-hmm. And that's what you have to understand about the chasing of money. It's an addiction. It's like alcoholism. It's like drug addiction. Why? Because what you do is you have a feeling that something that you do, drinking or making a lot of money, is going to give you relief. It's going to make you finally feel better. It's going to give you an escape from your deepest pain. And it does the first time. So you get the first amount of money, or you get the first time that you're drunk enough that you don't feel pain, and you think, I got it. And then what you discover very quickly is that you have to keep doubling the dose. Trump has been doubling the dose since he was 16 years old, maybe earlier. He's been trying to find outside himself what is missing inside, and it's more elusive than ever. Were it not more elusive, he wouldn't be running for president. He's running for his life. He's running because there is no way for him to feel any sense of worth without being reelected president.
So let me ask you this then. Yeah. So let me ask you this.
When he's reelected, if he's reelected, I hope he's not, but if he's reelected, in 10 minutes, it won't be sufficient. No matter how much money he takes from these other people, no matter how much chaos he creates, no matter how much power he exercises, it won't be enough.
Well, then let me just go into his background a bit, because Trump's grandfather was an immigrant, and apparently, according to news reports, was a pimp and a slimeball. Then, of course, his father, Fred Trump, was a slumlord and, also documented, a racist. So how has Trump's family history sort of shaped him personally and informed him of his worldviews?
I mean, that's such a huge question, and it probably is one of the things that interests me most, is what shapes a human being? And the number one, far and away, the most important thing that a child needs is to be loved, protected, seen, and valued when they are most powerless. And Trump grew up with a father who was emotionally completely incapable of expressing or feeling emotions other than anger, much like Trump himself. And his mother was neglectful, just wasn't involved in his life. Neither of them were capable of providing emotional security, love, reassurance, and neither of them were available to see him. You discover who you are because other people, before you've got that power in yourself, see you. And he never got any of that. He is part of an intense generational trauma that got visited probably long before his grandfather, because the grandfather became a slimeball and a pimp because of something related to his caretakers, probably his parents. So this legacy of trauma, I believe that trauma is normative, that it exists along a spectrum. What do I mean by this? I mean that trauma is an everyday and common experience in human beings. And Trump's is at the far extreme, perhaps, not even the far extreme, just in terms of what could have happened to him, but that we all go through very, very significant experiences of feeling inadequate, of feeling unprotected, of not being seen. And if we don't reckon with them, we visit that pain on others. That's what Trump has done in spades.
Great. Well, speaking about something that hasn't been seen, Melania, or as we like to call it on this show, melanoma, has been visibly absent from Trump's side for literally the last however long it's been. I mean, it's been a long time. Alina Habba is now the female that is most seen on Donald's arm. So first of all, I want to ask you this. What's Trump's relationship to women in general? And do you think that there are any women that Trump actually loves and respects?
So let me start with this. Trump is incapable of love, period, full stop. So there isn't that capacity within him. Or if there is, it's so buried that we will never see it. As for women, with men, what he wants to do is best them, defeat them, be bigger than them, use them.
Alpha male.
With women, pardon me?
The alpha male.
The alpha male. With women, his feeling is actually a purer hatred. And I suspect, and you're seeing me here be an armchair psychiatrist, I accept that if somebody says, on what basis do you say that? I would say simply, I have spent my life studying human behavior, but take it for what it's worth. I think that his mother's neglect, the fact that, look, if you grow up with a father who's utterly absent, not just emotionally absent, but physically absent, because his father never spent any time at home, how do you get a sense of your own worth? So he looked, as many boys do, to their mothers to feel loved and to feel safe. And so he didn't get any of that. And, we suffer the consequences.
Yeah. Well, look, I do know that he respected his sister, Judge Barry, whether he loved her or not. That I couldn't attest to, but I do know that he respected her for all of her achievements, from going to law school to becoming a federal court judge. In fact, while I know he respected her, he actually also feared her. He would say, she scares the shit out of me. And I said, I can't believe it because, I was fortunate enough to spend time with her and she's a lovely lady and she wouldn't be somebody that, so he goes, oh no, she could be as tough as nails. But let me then move on and ask you this, because Trump is regularly accusing Joe Biden of doing all of the unethical and all of the illegal things that he himself is doing or has done. Look, take a look at my book, for example, Revenge. How Donald Trump weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. So what does Donald Trump do? He then claims it's the Biden administration that's weaponized the Justice Department to go against him, right? It's called transference or projection.
Projection.
In your research, have you found that this has always been how Trump sidesteps responsibility?
This is a cardinal aspect of his character, and it happens, I assume, unconsciously. Whenever Trump says something hideous about someone else, it almost always is a projection of what he's feeling about himself, but is unwilling to own. And in his case, he's stretched it to preposterous lengths, because the things that he is most guilty of, he then accuses others, like Biden, of being guilty of, and often those people are the least guilty of it. So the gap between the ways in which he embodies his accusations and the ways in which those he accuses don't manifest them at all is huge. It's a yawning gap. And it is a way of defending yourself. Most of us, Michael, build up a series of defenders in our childhood. So as a child, you are the most vulnerable you will ever be. You require care to survive. And when you don't get what you need, you're not able to give it to yourself. So over time, what happens early in your life, could be as early as 7, 10, 12, you start to develop these defenders, these ways of coping. And one of them for Donald is to project, is to see in other people the weakness or the failure that he does not want to own in himself. That's a defender. The need for money is the work of a defender. What he doesn't have access to, and most of us don't, is the core self. Is the self that never, the core self is the self that never worries about its value because it experiences an intrinsic sense of value. And if you can be run, the whole world would change so dramatically if first people could begin to own their defenders, meaning, yes, that's true of me. I can get angry. I can be dishonest in certain situations, but that's not all of me. My core is goodness. We've lost the connection. We never had that much, but particularly in the face of all the things happening in the world that are scary, we've lost this connection to our core self because our defenders are on survival alert. They just want to make sure that we're okay. They just want to survive till tomorrow. Without that connection to the core self, and I'm talking to you about something that I have discovered, this is going to sound crazy to you, Michael. I actually give Trump some credit for what's happened for me in my life positively. Because Trump, during the period that I wrote that book with him, became the embodiment to me of what I did not want to be. And in doing that, he steered me away from the kinds of things that I might otherwise have been attracted to. And I sit before you today, able to say to you, I'm at peace with myself. I am at home in my own body. Do I think I'm perfect? Not remotely. Do I think I have ways in which I show up badly at times? Yes. But I'm deeply aware of a core goodness. I know if other people could have the experience I'm having, that we'd have a different world. Donald Trump will never know that, never get near it. And it is a fight between good and evil to the end.
Right. So then, what's the best defense against Trump? As in, what do you think is most likely to upset him the most? And more importantly, it's like, what sort of criticism do you think will get through to his base and change their minds about him? I have not been successful. Now, I've been successful in building a community, whether it's the Mea Culpa community or my other podcast that I do on the MeidasTouch network with Ben Meiselas called The Political Beatdown that we do live on YouTube. We have a massive audience between the two, millions of people. These are the people that are like-minded as you and I are. I cannot get through to change the minds of people who are supporting him. And it drives me crazy. I have friends that I will not speak to right now, some whom I care very, very much. I have helped them in their lives. They have been there for me during bad times in my life. And I just refuse. And I get into this, this argument with my wife all the time, where she'll be making dinner reservations for the four of us to go out, or for as a six part. Not interested, because every time we get together, they spew off the Fox bullshit. They spew off the Trump lies. And I say to them, how could you be so fucking stupid? I mean, we were literally at a restaurant not more than about 3 weeks ago, maybe closer to a month. And I said, why don't you get up? It's my reservation. This is my reservation, my restaurant. Why don't you get up and get the fuck out of here? Because I can't sit and listen. When I watch Fox, I'm only watching it so that I have material to discuss, like here on Mea Culpa or Political Beatdown. I'm not buying the bullshit that Sean Hannity or any of the other hosts, are spewing. What can we do to change the minds of his base?
Yeah. So, Michael, you're in some ways one of the best positioned in the world to know how that happens, because you were a true and total believer, and now you are at the opposite end of that spectrum. So you went through that transformation. Something happened to you that let you out of the spell that you were in, along with all the people you were working with. I think what happened, but you're in a position to say this better than me, but what I would say happened to you is the pain of what you were experiencing and who you were finally exceeded the pain of looking into yourself at what was going on and at what frightened you. And, pain is generally the only, reliable way to get people to change. Most people don't change because they see a better possibility. They change because they cannot tolerate the present reality that they're living in. And so you tell us, as opposed to me telling you, but how do we help people who are finding ways, including supporting Trump, to avoid the pain that they're really feeling? How do we get them to recognize that the way we're living and the way we're working isn't working and it isn't living? This is not the promised land. And it's getting worse. And almost nobody doubts that we are in a period now of tremendous decline. So when do people translate all of those pains they're seeing outside themselves into a mandate to take themselves on? Because the reality is, when you can embrace all of who you are, for better and for worse, you have nothing left to defend. And when you don't have anything left to defend, no more wars, no more conflict. You accept. You start by accepting yourself in all your various forms. And then by accepting yourself, you free yourself up to accept and love others. This is going to really send your audience to a different place and perhaps make them think that I'm way off here on the woo-woo side. But, there's a Glennon Doyle, who I'm sure a lot of your listeners or at least know the name, but is a very popular podcaster and author, had an interview recently with, oh my gosh, am I now going to forget her name? I am going to. Maybe it'll pop back into my head. But the person she had on the show said that she now had a practice in which she would ask herself every morning about the issues that were up for her. What would love say here? What would my heart say here in dealing with whatever the situation is? And love, or the heart, is the core self. And even though it's covered over for many people, it's there somewhere. And if I ask myself, since I was told this just a couple of days ago, if I ask myself, what would my heart say in this situation? It is often saying something to me very different than all my defenders, all my instinctive impulses are getting me to say.
You see, Tony, I don't think that the base will change their minds regarding him, no matter what. The only way to change their minds is, sadly, they're going to have to get, and this is proverbially, smashed in the mouth with a baseball bat.
I agree.
And when they're spitting out their teeth because they think that Trump is the savior, that he's the second coming of Christ. That's a real problem. And they will ultimately learn, as this country is now learning with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which he takes credit for. They will understand that their rights to do as legally permitted as the Constitution permits is all going to change, and that they will not be financially better off. They will be financially worse off. Not only financially worse off, they are going to lose rights that they cannot believe could even be taken away, like the right to determine, your as a woman, your right to decide, your right to choice. What's going to happen with, for example, like Obergefell, same-sex marriage or interracial marriage? What's going to happen with, your right to choose the religion and to the God to whom you pray? Under MAGA Mike Johnson, he wants to make the United States of America into a Christian nation. That's his goal, is to return America to a Christian nation. By the way, hey, fucking moron MAGA Mike, we were never a Christian nation. So it's really kind of funny. They make up their own ideals and they try to transfer it to everybody else. And that's when the minds of these people will be changed. The problem, it's going to be too late. Once you lose that right, you're never getting it back.
I agree with that. I mean, I don't have more to add to that because I think that's true. Until people experience the pain that Trump inflicts on them directly, harshly, they will not change. And by the time, if that were to happen, if he were to be reelected, then that will be too late. So the answer is the big thing you can do, the only thing you can do is get somebody who wouldn't, you're already, your listeners are already going to vote against Trump, but get somebody else who either wasn't going to vote or was going to vote for Trump, but especially wasn't going to vote for whatever reason to vote, because you're voting for your life. There's no question.
You're right. Now think about it this way too. If by some miracle of God, the Supreme Court rules that the 14th Amendment, specifically Section 3 of the Constitution, bars Trump from running for office because he's an insurrectionist, how does Trump respond? Because I'm assuming, knowing him as well that I does, that the guy doesn't get onto the horse and just ride off into the sunset.
No, what he does is he tries to marshal his supporters in a violent way to fight back. He tries to do in the United States what he's already done in Washington on January 6th, 2021.
Yep, just on a bigger scale.
Yeah, that's what he'll do. I mean, and there's, that hatred and anger and frustration is building up inside those supporters. They're still, I think, people who can be called on to do terrible things. We've seen it before, Michael.
That we have. But sooner or later, and I think you'll agree with this, sooner or later, all of Trump's appeals will run out, the cases will be in court, and Trump is going to be in court, unable to control the legal outcomes. Now, knowing that Trump needs to be in control, because he is a control freak, how do you think that he's going to even do in court, particularly if and when he has to testify?
Well, the big question, Michael, is whether those court dates will happen between today and Election Day, or even a month before Election Day, because once he's elected, all bets are off and he can start to interfere with the judicial system. So will he get convicted of a crime or multiple crimes before the election in November? That's the key issue, because I do believe, and the polling seems to suggest this, little as we can believe polling at this stage, but the polling does seem to suggest that if Trump is convicted of a crime, that will move a small percentage of his supporters from yay to nay. It's going to be decided once again by a small number of votes. So that's why I'm saying, I want to go back to what I said to you a moment ago. If every person who's going to vote for Joe Biden could go to one person they know who otherwise wouldn't vote, that would change everything. So there is something each person can do. You can change one person's mind or activate one person who's apathetic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, I totally agree with you. And I constantly tell people, you got to make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure that the rest of your family are registered, to vote. Because a lot of people, they just leave it to the last minute and then they forget. And then they're apathetic and they don't end up going. But look, we all know Trump's authoritarian bent and calls for violence are all part of that strongman act. Because as we were talking about in real life, believe me, right, this hostile rhetoric doesn't exist. But the way he's framing it makes it extremely dangerous.
No question.
Have you been threatened by Trump followers as I have?
Interestingly, I haven't. I have no idea why that is, but you're a lot more famous than I am.
Well, I don't know about that. I certainly am probably more public than most people. And as a direct result, I can't tell you the number of people. But before I go into that, I wanted to sort of bring something up because you said that's if the case is against Donald. There are right now 4 indictments, potentially 5 if they bring it in Michigan. But guaranteed, if the Jack Smith case for the election interference, which is now on hold, does not proceed March 5th or March 4th, whichever date it is, I am certain that the state criminal case, which is brought by Alvin Bragg and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, will go forward on March 25th. That's when it's starting. And there is no delay. There is no appeals for them to file. There's absolutely no delay tactic. That case is an easy case. And I think they only have it slated for like 6 or 7 weeks in terms of a trial, meaning it's over by June 1st, right? Give or take. And this is a bench trial, so it's not as if you're even going to have time for the jury to deliberate. There's a bench trial by Judge Engoron. I'm sorry, that's by Judge Merchan. It is a jury trial. So they will then have their deliberation. I still say sometime in the beginnings of June, this case is decided. And knowing the case as I know it, the documents speak for themselves. And the testimony of not just myself, but of many other people who have testified clearly shows his guilt.
The problem, as I'm sure you're aware, is that will his supporters see that outcome in the same way they would, for example, the Georgia case, which is about election interference, or the Washington case, which is about insurrection, in the same way that they see the case that you're talking about, which seems relatively less, critical.
Agreed. However, in the January 6th insurrection, that's probably a year-long trial because they have 1,000 witnesses. There's tens of millions of documents. This is only a handful, maybe 10 witnesses in total, and maybe 100, 200 documents in total. And while you may think it's trivial and you may think it's petty, it is what it is. And here's something more important. It is touched by Donald's hands, meaning the checks are written and signed by Donald. The affair was with Donald, et cetera, right? Whereas, he could claim with the election interference or with the voting machines that, these were other people that were doing it, and he shouldn't be held accountable for other people, right? That's, of course, part of their argument. This one, he directly has his fingerprints on, and nothing less. But, Tony, the hour goes by very quickly here on Mea Culpa. So I have one last question for you here. You've said, and I quote, "Our challenge is to hold on to our hope and our outrage without being hijacked by our fears." With the election looming, how do you propose we even do that?
You know, we can do hard things. We can hold opposite feelings. So I'd even amend slightly what you just read back to me, which I know I did say. But the way I'd amend it is to say, it's okay to feel fear. It does not mean that you cannot move forward. People feel fear. And you have every right to feel fear right now. The question is whether the fear galvanizes you or whether it keeps you from moving. So stay galvanized. Understand that our future is at stake here. This is a big deal.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Tony, let me turn around and say it's great to see you again, my friend. We're going to have our coffee again very, very soon. I always look forward to that, and I look forward to, your just clear insight on emotions, all things Trump related. Thank you, and definitely need to have you back on the show very, very soon.
Thank you very much.